maybe a little bit of technical difficulty. Uh, Here we are.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Hugh. Folks, this is Leadership Uncertain, where we are having adventures in power, confusion, love, and dignity. Maybe the dignity part maybe remains to be seen for today. We'll see. We'll see just how dignified we remain. Um, Hugh, I have been reading a book
Hmm.
that I think you would be very interested in reading.
Okay.
And there's a distinction that is made in this book between two different ways of thinking, and perhaps more importantly, two different ways in which human behavior unfolds.
Okay.
The book is called Alchemy by an absolute genius in marketing in Britain named Rory Sutherland. And the two different ways in which he talks about human behavior unfolding, and that's my framing, not his. He talks about logic, right? This is the kind of A leads to B leads to C. We can kind of see how that works. And
Hmm.
then he distinguishes that between that and something else. And I thought we might talk about that contrast today. The
Okay.
something else he calls psychologic. And this lines
Okay.
up with the work that we do at the Yes Works, where we're helping leaders align their people with the way and their leadership and the way that everything is structured, align all that with the way the human brain actually works. And
Hmm.
so, what Rory Sutherland talks about is, among other things in this book, is the incredible risk that seems to be involved when you do something that may seem illogical, defying the A to B to C logic, in favor of something that may instead get the kind of behavior that you want. This is not one of his examples, although that distinction reminds me of a story that I read about a jewelry shop owner who just could not seem to sell, could not move this turquoise jewelry. She was going on vacation and she told her staff, "I want you to mark it down to a third price. Let's just get this out of here." And when she came back, it was gone. And she said to her staff, I guess marking it down worked. And they said, "Marking it down? What do you mean? We tripled the price." And so that's not a economic, according to the theories of economics, that is not how that should go. And yet, when it comes to what Rory Sutherland is calling psychologic, this logic of how the human brain works as opposed to how economists predict that it works, this is what happens: is that it changed people's perception of the value of the object, and so made it more desirable, so much more so that they were willing to pay 3 times what they were unwilling to pay for it before.
So normally you bring up topics that we get to fight about.
Oh, I think we still get to fight.
Unfortunately, in this particular respect, I am in complete alignment with what you presented thus far. It's funny that you should be bringing this up today. One of the things I spent the last couple of weeks learning about was learning more about the man Keynes, who's responsible for most of our economic theory over the last 120 years or whatever it is, and coming to appreciate how little he understood about the nature of human incentives.
Mm.
The dude was I'm probably going to offend somebody listening here who spent a fair amount of their education learning about how stuff really doesn't work in the real world.
Mm.
And and so yes, I completely appreciate a framework in which we can appreciate nonlinear activity
Mm.
resulting in desired effects. Um, I know for me, every time, well, so a lot of my education lived in chaos theory and understanding how nonlinear the world really is. So, one of the things that's beautiful about Newtonian physics is that it is very elegant
Yeah.
and simplified.
I think about I forget what it's called, the something cradle, maybe, where the ball bearings all hanging in a line, and you pull two off here, and the
Yes,
middle
and
one stays, and
it
two pop off on
it
the other
it
side.
it gives a great example of how momentum is transferred from objects
Yes,
in an almost perfect and simplified manner.
I think it
And
might
what
actually be called Newton's cradle. That thing.
I'm not thinking you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong about that. I just don't remember the
I
name of
think
it
that may be
either.
the closest you've ever come to saying that I'm right.
Really? Oh,
No.
I thought I said you're right all the time. I just told you that you're right today.
All right.
Uh, well, simply to now reinforce your point, one of the things that I come to appreciate is one of the fallacies that avails a lot of leaders is somehow we have grown to become more laudatory
Mm,
of linear logical reasoning than the creative counterpart. And in 20 something years of running businesses, I've come to appreciate that neither one is Mecca.
mm.
And you need both. You need a
Yeah.
good, healthy dose of the crazy and the linear.
Yeah.
You need to be able to have that creative spark that gives you that edge when presenting to clients. So, for instance, I think I told you the story. We had a situation where we were supposed to open a new business. This was in Clinton, North Carolina. And the small town, 8,500 people back in the day when we were there. And we had bought a franchise and we're being very responsible. It cost $120,000 to get the building modified to be able to have the franchise be installed. It was going to take so much time. And for the life of us, we could not get financing. Couldn't get anybody to lend us money. We had good credit, whatever. We had other assets. Nobody would want to lend us money. The leadership team ended up going to this conference, and there we met an owner of a franchise one city over who started talking to us and was very nice to us. And we ended up just being very respectful. We were young children, we were young kids at the time in our mid 20s. So we were just grateful that anybody talked to us and we were willing to listen to anybody who sounded like they had a lick of sense. Well, in any case, what we didn't realize is that we were being interviewed. And at the end of the conference, he said, "All right, well, I've made my decision. You're buying my stores to a city over." It was a 45-minute drive from the city that we were in. Now, we could already not be able to finance one store, but now we have to buy two more. And he was looking to close at the same time that we were looking to try to open this other one store. So now we went from having one problem child that we couldn't finance to having three that we now had to find money for and operate and staff and all the other stuff. And now, and I mean, he gave us an offer we just could not refuse. And I remember the darkness of the night in which I had to just brainstorm. And what came to me was, you know what? This is not the story of three stores. This is the story of an entire conglomerate that starts with 5 stores with 3 to begin.
Mm.
And I rewrote my business plan talking about a 15-store development showing Google Maps images of cities that we would eventually go get. We had a different conversation with the franchisor and optioned 15 locations for, I don't know, like $5,000 or something like that. And then went back to the same lenders and said, we have a development deal for 5 stores. We have 3 that are on the table right now, and we need to get started with financing. We found financing in less than 3 weeks and ended up having 5 stores in the city area that we would grow into. We never made it to the 15 because we were acquired before we were able to fully complete the plan. And it taught me that, yes, people are looking for sensible plans, but they're also looking for something exciting to be a part of. And a very big part of getting anything to happen, any kind of activity in human space, is a lot of times dependent on a habit that is arguably ingrained in our DNA after 100,000 years of practice, which is the art of storytelling. And so, what you can have something mean is incredibly important. And the art of storytelling is part fact and part imagination and all relating. And if you
And
can,
so much framing, right?
yes, yes.
What is the
Give
context
me,
we can put this in?
what does this mean to me as a human being that I get to participate in whatever it is you're talking about? And if you
Right.
can involve someone in that movement, you can traverse the psychological and the logical. You can appeal to their imagination, and you can appeal to things that make sense. You're going to say,
Your story of we couldn't get funding for one store, but we could get funding for a plan for 15, reminds me of two other stories. One Rory Sutherland story, and another kind of concept that he talks about, and one about a story of one of my current and recent clients. Rory Sutherland says sometimes the opposite of a good idea is another good idea. And he gives an example of somebody who had a presentation to give, in front of a couple thousand people on stage. He goes into the restroom, does his thing, washes his hands, and as soon as he turns on the water, the force of the water bounces off his hands and hits him right in the crotch. So
okay,
now it looks like he's wet himself, right? And so
okay,
he goes and he's like trying the paper towels, and the paper towels aren't doing anything. He tries the blower isn't doing anything. He's still just got this wet spot. So that was a good idea, right? Dry the wet spot. Well, what's
right.
the opposite of the good idea?
Get everything wet.
Get
Just
everything
get
wet.
yourself
So
and just
it
go up
happened to
dripping
be pouring down rain. So he went outside,
for a walk
got
outside.
completely soaked,
There
and
you go.
maybe not how he hoped to go out on stage, and certainly better than it might have been. So that's the one thing. The other story from a client of mine, and this is a company of electricians. They've been losing people. They've lost about half of their field staff. Half of their electricians had been poached by competitors, and they wondered, like, how do we keep people here? And one of the details that he shared with me in our first conversation was, one of the things that we've done recently, half a year ago, is we changed our we changed our compensation plan. They're now getting paid more money. And when I interviewed the electricians, I learned that one of the things they were upset about is the new comp plan, in which
Oh,
they're
wow.
earning more money.
Okay.
So they went from essentially from hourly to something that had to do with pay based on,
Number of jobs
on
or whatever.
production.
Right.
And not a single one of them was earning less.
But that's not
And
the
he
point.
kept
Maybe they were working more, or maybe it wasn't as. What was
the
the deal?
owner repeatedly showed them how much they were earning more. And I think they believed that they were upset about the comp plan. What became clear over time was that they were upset about how much change was happening without consulting them. And so what we do, right, is like they intellectually understood he's the owner. He gets to do what he wants. It is part of his right to make these changes. And so because of that intellectual understanding, they did a bunch of mental gymnastics that they weren't aware of to figure out, what am I upset about? And that was an easy place to point, is we're no longer being paid hourly. If I'm sitting here in my truck, I'm not making any money anymore. And so logic was no longer at play. Instead, to use Rory Sutherland's term, we're talking all psycho logic. And I have just lost Hugh, everybody. Hugh seems to have perhaps accidentally lost us, and hopefully we'll get him back in a moment. In the meantime, I'll just riff a little bit on how often I find that I am perplexed by people's behavior, that it seems irrational, it seems illogical. People seem to be behaving in ways that make no sense, and arguably, probably, it doesn't make sense in this linear logic framework that we've been talking about. It makes sense instead in this world of psycho logic that Rory Sutherland is talking about, and that we work with our clients on in the S Works. And welcome back, you. Glad you were
But
able to
it's
come back
funny.
on.
My IP address changed, and so I was
Uh-huh.
able to hear you. I didn't actually somehow disconnect, but
Oh,
I'm
how
sure
about
I
that?
disappeared for you.
You
So I heard
did.
everything you said, and the reason that I left was because I was searching for a quote that was from the Chinese Tao Te Ching
Mm,
that addresses true leadership. And I'll read it to you if you're open.
of course.
True leaders are hardly known to their followers. Next to after them are the leaders people know and admire. After them, those they fear.
Mm,
After them, those they despise.
mm,
To give no trust is to get no trust. When the work's done right, with no fuss or boasting, ordinary people say, "Oh, we did it all by ourselves."
I remember
And
that end. Yes.
yes. And so I was thinking about what you were saying. And I know that in our shop, one of the things that's sacrosanct is, even though it is so infuriating at times and it can be so slow, it actually isn't. So, one of the beautiful things that my team is incredible at is, I remember you were the one that talked to me about this, and I just kept scratching my head. You kept telling me how hard it was for people to change things,
Mm.
change management. Like, that's a whole subject. Oh
It's a
my
whole
gosh,
subject that I think
change
is a
management.
self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of cases.
Amazing.
Speaking of
Amazing.
psychologic versus logic, right?
Absolutely.
I sometimes think, and I know I'm interrupting you. I'll come right
No, you're
back.
fine.
Right, that the difficulty in organizational change
Mm,
is often, I compare it to the toddler who's fallen.
mm,
Right, this kid who's just barely learning to walk falls over, and just kind of lies there stunned for a moment until the
mm,
parent rushes over and says, "Oh my goodness, you kiddo, like what's up?" And then the kid starts crying, informed by the freak out of the parent. And so I don't want to overstate my case here, because yes, change is difficult for people and some change needs to be managed,
yes.
just like some toddlers who fall down actually do hurt themselves.
Sure.
And this practice of change management, I think, sometimes creates the freak out for people, as opposed to, hey, this is changing. Here we go.
Well, and what I found
And you were going to
is,
tell us about how awesome your team is about something.
well, here's what I found. I found that we have folks that stay with us on our team because they say that they've never been in a place where we've been able to effect so much change so quickly.
Mm,
Where in an hour, in a meeting in an hour, we can change policy, so much so that we require folks to watch the videos of the past meetings, just because you could be working in a completely different place. Yeah, you could be working a completely different place in a week and a half, because the
yeah.
changes can be so radical. And what's neat is that change adoption is, from their accounts, revolutionary. Like, it's normal for us, for me,
Mm,
because I've not done it any other way my whole career. But here's the difference. Here's the ingredient. You see, like how you started the premise by saying the fella is going to make this decision and this is how it's going to be.
right.
Well, one of the things I learned a long time ago, and this was because I got robbed. Four of my employees got together in a particular business and stole, like, I don't know, between the four of them, it's like $250,000. It was a ridiculous amount of money across three companies.
Wow.
And what I learned was, I'm not going to blame myself for the fact that the theft happened, but I was responsible for creating an environment where it could be justified.
Mm.
That across different businesses, they could collude and justify what happened. The only central ingredient was me. So I had a chance to look deeply at what I was doing to create a culture in which folks felt so disempowered that stealing from the company was the way that they justified being able to create value.
Do you mind if I call you a name?
Sure. Sure.
Dude, you are so mature, right? As a leader, I think that's such a mature position to take about this, and it's one that I encourage my clients to take all the time. And it is a hard posture to take.
Mm.
To instead, for example, like one of the words that gets bandied about a lot right now is entitled,
Mm.
right? Instead of thinking of my people as entitled to, and you may well be correct about that, right?
Sure.
And just as you said, what is the culture that I have contributed to, continue to contribute to, that leads people to feel as if they've got to take in order to have what's coming to them?
Yeah. And I had to own that. And that was an interesting journey. What was neat was after the theft, the folks who stayed,
Mm,
because we had to pick the business up, and the people who stayed, there be heroes.
mm.
That would be the branded tattoo if I could have one on my shoulder.
You
There
can
be
have one.
heroes. The idea is that they showed up and stepped up in ways that I will never be able to truly understand or repay.
Mm,
Because I mean, from the clutches of potential bankruptcy, we were able to rescue said companies and
mm,
get back to a place that looked like okay. Anyway, here's what I learned. If you want to, and it started from a place of fraud protection, right? How do I make it so that people don't steal from me? Well, I have an opportunity to listen to their stories, because what happens, one of the things I used to teach business owners about being able to determine whether or not there was malfeasance in a business is just listen to the stories. Just listen to the perspective of the story of a person talking. So you have to talk to them to hear the story they're telling about the other people in their lives, about what they feel about their work. And if you hear them being the victim or the hero, or in a place where everybody else is always wrong and they have to basically do, if you hear them with a very specific kind of hero complex, then some just watch and make sure that we count the till after they're done with the register. So one of the
yeah, well
things
said.
that became very obvious was, okay, well, first you start listening to stories, and then the next exercise was, well, what if we helped them make the story? What if the person on the other side of whatever is being done has a role in helping to build the story? So the way change happens in any of my organizations today, I mean, big change. If change is going to affect you, you are going to have a voice in the story. So a lot of times my executive team will come to me and say, "We've made this change. We've made this decision. This is how it's going to be." And I'll say to them, "Yeah, I hear you, but guess what? We have not taken it to the team. The people whose lives are affected by this change have a sense to know and be able to give feedback. And we don't have the authority. I own the damn company. I don't have the authority to come to you and tell you that I'm right and I have a lock on what must happen. Instead, if you are being paid by me to fulfill some kind of role, I'm going to make the assumption that chances are you have more insight on that role that you do every day. And I have an idea that might work. And if you were going to do something that is affecting this process or affected by this process, you have a responsibility for advocacy, because I could be making a mistake. I could be making a mistake with my projection about what should be happening with your job that you do every day. And I get to create the space for me to be wrong and you to say, yes, I get it, or no, get this detail over here might affect what you're thinking about. Or yes, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. Thank you for helping me. So we have a couple rules around here. We don't make changes if it's going to lead to somebody getting a report created that they're not going to read. So we are very, very, very sensitive about that which looks like bureaucracy. Very sensitive. I don't even have reports that I would love to have. That would be great for other people to get. But if I don't read them consistently and I don't build them myself, I'm not going to allow for that workflow to happen. And so that's part of what we have as the culture. So now people know that if change is going to happen, they're going to be involved, and you better believe it's going to make their lives better. Those are the rules. And so now, with those rules being set, folks are very excited about anything that's going to change, because normally it means stuff is going to get less chaotic, or they're going to have less work to do. And if that's the culture around which change is happening, it happens fast. And we have, of course, a codification process where we bring the admin in, because we don't expect people to keep track of things that are not good at keeping track of things, because that doesn't make any sense to me. So we make sure that it's documented. They have checklists. The checklists automatically get updated in real time, so we don't have to make agreements to go do it later. And then once we've decided it, it's very Orwellian. It has always been until it never was. And that's how we roll. And as a result, change is fun and engaging and exciting and inclusive. And we don't actually agree on it until everybody. Now, we don't require everybody to agree to a change, because that's impossible and insane. However, we do request alignment. And we have mastered the ability to align with something, and people who have incredibly vehement dissent, they are allowed to express and continue to express at appropriate intervals.
At appropriate intervals. I love that caveat.
Yes.
Right? Is that I think the particular phrase comes from Amazon that I really appreciate: the disagree and commit. Right?
Yes.
We're going to disagree. We're going to disagree vehemently. We're going to somebody else, I remember hearing from somebody else the expression, argue like you're right, listen like you're wrong.
Yes.
And then we're going to follow a predetermined timeline, or more appropriately, kind of functional line, where we're going to disagree and hammer it out. And then the decision is going to be made according to XY protocol. And after that, we're committed, or it sounds like you're saying aligned. And at particular intervals, we will make some measurements to assess its effectiveness, bring forward any new information, retry the question if need be, and make the decision again. Or do we continue in the direction we're going, or do we change directions?
And let's make that even more nuanced, because oversimplification is always the enemy. The understanding is, because here I'll tell you where I've taken it now. I become more interested in why the disagreement. Like, what is the element that is causing a particular person to feel intensely? Because other kinds of compromises can be made, especially if said processes rely on them. If they are a part of this change, and they are a critical part of this change, it is important to understand, what is it about what we're exploring that's causing you to irk? And it takes time, but it's time well spent. Couple of things
incredibly well spent.
Yes, because one, a huge part of resistance is just simply being heard. If you just take and I'm not saying, so sadly, people hear me talk like this and they think tactics. This is not a tactic. This is humanity at work. Like, you cannot be a sociopath and pull this off in excellence. You actually have to listen and you actually have to care. This is not just words go in ear, shake head here, thumbs up. This is the strategy we have. We check off the button. No, like you actually have to be an engaged, real leader.
This is a
And
human
here we
process.
are. There we go. We're being human beings right now,
Yeah.
and we happen to have titles after our names. All right. So the act of actually listening to the other human being usually reduces resistance by 85% right off the bat. The fact that they can breathe a sigh of relief and know that they have been heard, because what will happen a non-trivial amount percent of the time is that their resistance will either modify the outcome that we had a really strong idea about and go, I didn't think about that thing that could be a better applied or adjusted to. And you also buy goodwill, because even though they may have to kind of suffer through whatever this thing is, they know that they are treasured enough for everybody to stop and accommodate their words and their perspective. And that buys you capital, relationship
Hugely.
capital.
Absolutely right. So the company of electricians is still operating on the same new compensation model.
Right.
The owner has taken time to just listen, has invested in training the team that's left, has invested in re-engineering their mission, and something that we at the YesWorks introduced to our clients, this idea of having an adversary. It's not enough for our primitive brains to have a mission. It's nice to have a goal. It's also just incredibly powerful to have some force out there.
It's always very convenient when everybody else is doing it wrong, so we're better. And it's us against them.
Or it could just be gravity, right?
Sure.
Like it could just be gravity. And in their case, it's a little bit more like gravity. Well, they are now having some of the best sales months they've ever had in a 20-year history of their company.
I believe it.
With only a little bit more than half the staff they had a year ago. Because according to non-logical means, they've gotten now not just an engaged staff of electricians and folks in the office, they have an impassioned staff that are out there fighting the good fight on behalf of
shoulder to shoulder, taking it down. Absolutely.
There you go.
I get that. And to me, and so this is one of the mistakes, and we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the talk. One of the mistakes that people, do you remember as a child turning on one of those analog TVs and seeing the fuzz?
Oh, yes. In fact, I remember as I think maybe a 5-year-old kid, just after sunset, being, I think my parents were out in the backyard. My sister and I went into the basement to turn on the TV, and we're watching the TV, and all of a sudden it just went to fuzz. And I was terrified. I think I must have been older than 5 because I was immediately terrified of Gremlins.
Okay.
I remember the movie Gremlins.
Okay.
I was convinced
that was a
that
terrifying
the
movie.
picture had just disappeared because of
Gremlins
into this
movie. Yes.
Snow.
Yes. Okay. Well, so what's interesting about that we're going to call it a phenomenon, is that it is one of the most practical applications of chaos in our regular life. And what chaos isn't confused nonsense, noise. It is normally higher ordered patterns that you are not in a position, because you are either bereft of the capability or you don't have the perspective to be able to understand or appreciate what patterns are being communicated. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I remember, I loved science museums as a kid. I always loved science museums, and especially like the hands-on stuff. And I remember something I think called a chaotic pendulum.
Okay. Yes, like
Have
a
you
double
seen one of
pendulum.
these things?
They like,
Yeah, there's kind of there's one hinge here,
yeah,
and then a pendulum from the end of the
yeah,
crossbar. There's a pendulum here.
a
There's a
pendulum
pendulum
and a
here,
pendulum. Yep.
and the whole
Hmm.
thing is also a pendulum, and it ends up
Hmm.
just doing all these kind of
And what's
seemingly
so that
chaotic.
is the precept for, they're called coupled hyperbolic nonlinear partial differential equations.
Of course
That's what
they
they
are.
set up. And what's beautiful about them is that they never have the same pattern twice, because they're incredibly sensitive to what are called initial conditions and boundary conditions. So how you orient them to start will determine their rate of action, and you have a very hard time replicating exactly how they start. And so they are chaotic systems, but they're not nonsense. They're not nonsense. And so for so much of what we interpret as chaos, we equate as nonsense. And what's neat about chaos is, if you can relax yourself, you can recognize that sometimes chaos points to higher ordered thinking
Hmm.
and linear thinking. For as much as us control freaks would like to believe, allows us to be able to simply get from point A to point B, higher order thinking allows you to fold the paper.
Mm.
And instead of taking 100 steps, you get there in one jump.
Mm.
And so you have to be careful. And you know what's beautiful is that the creatives in our lives have more access to nonlinear creative thinking than many of us left brain dominant folks that are all about the logic. And this brings us back to the original thesis, which is a fair amount of exposure to both is so critical for almost every part of your life. It is through the nonlinear chaotic that you're able to breathe. That's where inspiration comes from. It's the nonlinear stuff. I mean, in your life and in your business, you don't get paid because you just pound the pavement and work for hours. You get paid because you have this idea, this model, this edge that came from the blackness of your imagination somewhere. You were able to codify it
Yeah.
and then grow a team around it to execute.
Well,
Now, the execution requires linearity.
that's right. Where I do not thrive, right? But it's kind of like right now. I took the pendulum that is my experience in the corporate world,
Hmm.
along with the pendulum that is the experience that I've had as a theater director, and then over here there's the pendulum of the experience that I have as a leadership, taking kids out on backpacking trips, combined over here with the pendulum that of my time as I don't know if you know this. I was a keeper's aide in the elephant house at the
Oh,
National
wow.
Zoo.
Okay.
And all of those things I can feel and see at play in the work that I do with clients now, right? It's like, what I learned from the elephants is.
It's funny that you should say that. So I, I feel every day, I am, I say it often enough, I feel like I'm the luckiest dude in the world, often,
Mm,
because what I do today requires the sum total of everything that has come before. I mean, every experience,
mm,
every professional engagement from my childhood. There is, I don't know, maybe it's a limitation, maybe it's not. So I had the benefit of being what's called a cadet commander for what's called an encampment. So at 16, I was a cadet lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Auxiliary. And they put me as the commander in charge of an activity with about 100 kids. So my job was to get them up in the morning. I had to make sure that they were fed, that they got their classes. They all had different classes that they had to take. There was an entire command structure. and we just did what we did. So we had objectives for the week. There were 7 days. We had to make sure they got up in the morning and they worked out and da da da. And so I was responsible for making sure that this all happened. And when things didn't happen or people didn't get to places on time, it was my fault. And I had to be the one to, to report to my boss why things didn't happen, or I would get chewed out and I had to deal with conflict and all this other stuff. And it was amazing, the experience and perspective at a 16-year-old, and I did it again at 19 and again at 21. And these activities were amazing. And so I learned how to run 100-person plus organization as a teenager.
Mm.
But where I had
Yeah,
the
awesome.
most fun, the most effective experience was drill team. And so this was the cadet competition team. I was 14 years old when I marched on the field for the first time. I got my first command when I was 15, and I was in that role from age 15 to 20. That's for 5 years. And it was 16 of us. And we would practice on basketball courts. And from 1996 to 2001, we went to the national competition in our sport 4 times. So these were kids that were from, let's just say not everybody on the team spoke English. Because these were just kids that we didn't have money. We didn't have very much, but we had each other and we had a basketball court, and we played volleyball and we march and we just trained because there was no money to do anything else. And so by simply focusing, working hard, and devoting ourselves to this sport, we became among the best in the country. And now, as an adult, my company is less than 20 people. And it's the same kind of we the willing, led by the unknown, have done so much with so little that we can now do anything with nothing kind of attitude. And that's the kind of spirit that we have, and it harks back to that kind of, but the engineering and the nuclear engineering and the science and the finance and the computer programming that I did as a grad student, all of it is in play. It's funny because what's special about our process is that we model an accounting problem like a fluid flow problem. Because I don't know if you know this, my thesis was in fluid mechanics. I'm an oil spill reclamation expert. That was what my studies were in. And I modeled the accounting problem for data migration that we solved as one of my fluid flow problems. So
yeah,
we
that seems
modeled,
not logical, right? I mean, speaking of not
there
linear.
you go. But because we model the data coming from the legacy system as a body of fluid going through a pipe. On this side of the pipe is the legacy. On this side of the pipe is the target. We've been able to outflank everybody that approaches the problem like an accounting specialist. If you think about it like accounting, you're going to do weird things like do your trial balances on a monthly basis. Well, if I treat the entire data set as a flask with fluid in it, and I know that I can pour from the left to the right, and all of it either goes in or it doesn't, I don't have to do as many quality checks. But that's if you've not modeled it like an accounting problem. If you're thinking about it like an accounting problem, you're going to treat it like an accounting problem. I treat it like a fluid flow problem, and as a result of that, we kick everybody's ass in the industry that we're in.
Wow.
We're able to deliver months faster.
Do you tell your clients that? Do they know that you're pouring their data from one flask into another?
I used to when we had that kind of time. Now we just drop the mic because we just kind of shrug our shoulders and go, we've done this 2,600 times. If you do something that will surprise us, then we'll give you a star. Otherwise, let's sign the work and let's go. Let's do this. Not saying that we can't learn from something that you've done, but chances are, if you have a problem, we will be in a position to support you solving it. And that's kind of the attitude we have now. Anyway, thank you for letting me go at you. That was fun.
Very often when we're talking, you end up saying something that I can kind of see how it might make sense. I sure as heck don't get it.
Fair enough.
which is fine because I can just enjoy your brilliance without really seeing all of
What
the
was the
mechanics.
detail this time that was kind of throwing you?
Oh well, I mean, I can kind of imagine how you could treat a data transport problem like a fluid mechanics problem, but I don't
Okay.
understand data transport or fluid mechanics well enough to even
Ah,
really know what you're saying.
ah.
And I can totally grasp
Sure.
that there's a certain as Rory Sutherland is talking about, there's a certain risk in approaching the problem in a nonlinear fashion, and the payoffs can be immense.
Yes.
And one of the things that he's talking about in his book, as I was listening to it on my drive this morning, is and he brought up the expression from the 80s, I think it is, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM,
Okay.
right? You may or may not solve problem X. If you go at it in a logical, linear, progressive fashion, you're probably not going to be fired for failing to solve it.
Okay.
If you go at it in a nonlinear fashion, no matter how promising, if you fail, you may well be fired or have some other kind of psychosocial consequence
Sure.
for having done something that doesn't make easy sense to other people.
Let's talk about it because that's a controversial point that I like.
Yeah. All right.
So you're not wrong, but just as we've been talking about, no, let me start again. You're not wrong. And as we've been talking about, the the art is in the framing and the cell. So one of the it has been a joy. So in my experience, I don't know if I share this with you, but in the last 25 years, I've probably been a part of or started about 30 something companies at this point in 11 different industries. And what you learn from either having to do people's books or do the accounting or start a company or whatever in different industries, you recognize that a lot of them have very similar challenges and a lot of them have very not similar challenges and they're on different spectrums. So like one of the things we found out is, say we had a health reinsurance consulting business that we did for 8 years. And what's interesting about health reinsurance is very little, but what did shop as promising is the fact that that world has figured out optical character recognition. Like they read and scan documents and have automated systems around massive document management because they need it. I mean, this is an industry that the average health insurance company has to review and read hundreds of thousands of documents in a given week. So no human being can process it all. So you have incredible databases that have been around for 25 years reading paperwork. Whereas other companies that we were involved in, like accounting, we didn't know how to scan a document in and have it optical character read, a field. Like that was brand new. So what would happen is you would take solutions that were absolutely boring in certain industries and present them as potential innovative solutions in other industries, and you'd look like a genius. And what then became appropriate is something that John Snow, I think I may have shared him with you in the past. He has a concept that he made popular when he was operating on the Queen of England in 1840, I think, and collecting butterflies and solving with statistics the problem of cholera in the city of London using a methodology called the consilience of inductions. And it's the idea that you can apply holistic principles from one area of study to another area of study. And you do so carefully by being able to know where the integrals are versus where the distinctions are between the sciences. And so when I tell you about the framing, if you're going to be non-traditional in the way that you try to solve a problem, the way you get the rest of the people involved, the stakeholders, the people who can potentially fire you, or the people who will not believe in you if they're investing in you, is you show them where the integrals lie. So you say something like, you know what, if we model the problem like this other thing over here, this other thing over here shares these characteristics with the problem that we have in front of us, so that it is not completely far-fetched, but there is some level of connection that shows that there's really no nonlinear thinking. There's just higher order thinking that you don't get.
Yes.
And part of the creative's challenge is to show where there is truly one thing connecting to the other, and that we have a system that has similar principles, and we're just borrowing from this thing over here. And so it's not that scary and not that different. And if we fail, okay, we just didn't model it appropriately. But these people over here have solved this problem. And if we can figure out what is similar, then the nonlinear resolves itself to looking more linear.
Right.
So I give you a case in point, and then I'll stop talking at you. You live in a house with your family. You are in your bed at night. It is dark. You hear footsteps in the hallway. You do not hear that your house has been broken into. How do you know that it's your daughter walking down the hallway to use the bathroom?
I don't.
Okay, very good.
I suspect it because if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras.
Okay.
I've also, she has a smaller size than most adults. That's going to lead to different rhythms and other characteristics of the footfalls. The deliberateness with which she walks, the direction from which the sound is coming from. There are lots of tiny little signals that I'm likely to pick up on.
So you've just talked your way through the real-time solution of a second order partial differential equation.
And it all happens like that.
Because that's how smart you are.
Right. And I remember falling once in high school. I was in my living room and I fell. I had a glass of water in my hand, 2/3 full. Right. And I really fell. I ended up on the ground and I didn't spill a single drop of water. There is nothing conscious that I did to orient that water, not just with actual physical gravity, but with all of the dynamic forces at work, so that the water stayed somehow in the glass. And I remember lying there on the ground thinking,
that was pretty cool.
My brain has got some real
right.
amazing
well, so
capacity.
let's talk about that for a second. So that's the point I'm making to you. That was a second order nonlinear partial differential equation that you solved by simply that's all partial differential equations is. You are listening and having all these things that is not just the person in front of your face. That's a linear equation. A partial differential equation is I don't have all the information, but I have clues. Mm-hmm. And because you were able to contextualize those clues, what looked like nonlinear, incomprehensible system behavior becomes understandable, and you started off with the best answer ever. I don't know, but I can guess. And if you can involve somebody in the I don't know, but I can guess, and here's what we have as clues. Let's get curious. The nonlinear resolves to the linear, and now you have somebody that you can tell a story with. And if there's change involved, now you have a change management process, because now you're engaging together and you're telling a similar story.
That helps you sell.
Yeah.
I also have enough experience to say And it's also very likely that they're going to look for a scapegoat, and you're going to be convenient if it doesn't work out.
Sure. That's fine.
There's something in our conversation that reminded me of somebody you introduced me to recently, who objected to the idea of working with us to some degree, and we'll see yet
Sure.
to what degree, because he doesn't go in for touchy-feely stuff.
Okay.
And it's not an entirely uncommon objection for us to get, although generally we don't end up talking to people. There's a fair amount of self-filtering out of people
Sure.
who would have that objection. One of the things that's remarkable about many of these leaders is that they recognize that in marketing and sales, there has to be a certain amount of nonlinear kind of, this is just the way psychology works. They will get in deep on the psychology of marketing and sales,
Sure.
and then fail to recognize that leadership is a marketing and sales job.
The biggest one, arguably.
Right? Yeah, you've got to be doing this marketing and sales all day, every day.
Always be closing.
For some reason, when it is directly revenue facing, it's not touchy-feely. It's the nature of the beast.
Sure.
And then when it comes to what are the behaviors that I want from my team, and in that context, it's touchy-feely.
Well, I can tell you that it's simply because it's curious to see where intelligence does not pervade and difference is distinction is abandoned for difference. And people create silos in their intelligence. And that's
I've never done that.
I am telling you not because I am preaching at you, but because I am a recovering addict.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how well I'm recovering. Definitely relate to the addict part.
So the part of my life's mission, and I know we're wrapping up now, part of my life's mission is to find integrity. And what that means for me at this point is being the same guy wherever you find me. So if I'm at,
darn right,
at the gym, or if I'm at, my community service, or if I'm in my social clubs, or if I'm at work, you meet the same guy and you're facing the same values. And what happens also is that you can call this touchy-feely, but I also realize that I'm in biased company. My job as a human being is to be in connection. Like that's, as a CEO, I have two things that I have to do. It resolves really to one. My job is to be a place where chaos fades away. So people can come, they can connect, and they can know when they walk away that everything is going to be able to be okay for at least the next step. That's it. That's all I got. You're going to come, you're going to talk, you're going to share, and the next step, we're not going to be annihilated in the next step. That's it. I can't promise more than that because I can't, but at least you'll be able to take a breath and we'll be able to have an intelligent idea together for the next step. And the rest is for the future to figure out. And so that part of connection is critical, absolutely critical. And I cannot think of any axe that I would prefer to sharpen than my ability to have people feel seen, heard, and that they matter. Because when I do that, I make world-class teams. I've been doing it since I was 14 years old.
Preach.
I've been doing it since I was 14 years old. And what you can do is you take a kid that does not speak English. You make it so that he can answer panel quiz questions faster than people who actually, because he has to now phonetically encode the questions in the book. So he has to study harder because he doesn't even understand what's being asked, but he knows what the words sound like and he knows what the answers are. And he can go down faster on the buzzer. He will run faster. He will march harder, and he will march and stay behind the person in front of him and will be perfect in front of that judge. And all you have to do is tell him that he is worth so much more than he thinks he does because he's not a citizen of this country or whatever the background is. And what you do is you show him that he can matter. He can matter more than any person he knows.
Yeah.
And all he has to do is recognize that all he has to do is work hard for it and apply his intelligence. And he can have genius coming out of him. And you can do
Preach.
that for every single person on your team. And when you do, when you show them authentically, this is not a tactic, when you authentically show them that they have the ability to literally do anything, they band together and they do the incredible. And they clutch the incredible from the jaws of the impossible.
So this show is Leadership Uncertain, Adventures in Power, Confusion, Love, and Dignity. In the last 2 or 3 minutes, Hugh, I think we've gone through all of those things,
Yes.
right? From your, I can tell you what let's figure out the next step. What happens after that, I can't tell you. We won't be annihilated in this next step. We might be in the step after that, right? There is confusion and
Absolutely.
and uncertainty there, and the power and dignity and love that is present in. And speaking of psychologic, I hear from leaders a lot, X and Y should be, right? People should just do the job, right? For example, they should understand that this and that are not professional, or that this is what this takes. There's a lot of should out there, and should is one of my signals that I'm getting ready to wrestle with reality, which never turns out well, by the way.
Isn't that the truth?
Here is something that I think, Hugh, I am certain of, and I hear you certainly speaking with a great deal of passion and maybe some certitude. When people believe that they have been seen, heard, and understood, and valued,
they matter.
that they matter, that is where the power of leadership is. And
Yes.
So whatever your shoulds are, set them aside in favor of that, and you will see unbelievable things happen. And I'm reminded of somebody whom I drastically underpaid many years ago, simply because that's what we had as a theater company, saying, we would walk through fire for you. And I knew in that moment, she was not saying we would walk through fire she would walk through fire for me, or that her colleagues would walk through fire for me. They understood that I was in some way a window for them. She was saying, I will walk through fire for myself.
Right.
Because I was able to reflect to her how much she mattered and what she was capable of.
Yes. Yes.
And who wouldn't walk through fire? We will all walk through fire for ourselves when there's some level of belief.
And when somebody has the courage to give us that kickstart, to say, hey, look at how much you're actually worth.
Yeah.
Give that a shot. And believe in us in ways that we probably wouldn't believe in ourselves. And that's what leaders get to do. And if they don't see that, if instead it's a transactional, if it's a reductionist transactional relationship, okay, then that's what you get. At the same time, just recognize you are leaving money on the table. And you put it all together. You have a great adversary outside. You have a great internal process. You engage people where things are going to affect them. So you use their best ideas and then have them sell those ideas back to you. So they get to own the chain and you have less to do. Like, all of that matters. And so to me, as we wrap up, it comes together, not because we're trying to make things harder and become mushy, feely people. It's when you're actually showing up to the job and you are showing up from a place of authenticity, the feeling and the engagement help create the best kinds of results that are possible. And you begin to test what a team can do. And you begin to test what's even feasible and possible. And you start to learn. It's an amazing place where I am right now in our team's trajectory, where I do as much learning. I don't understand how most of the stuff works anymore, because they have taken our processes and they are innovating and they are getting curious and trying things and coming back and showing me that problems I didn't know could be solved by us are being solved by us. And that's what it looks like to work. And I don't direct all of it because I don't understand how all of it works. And that's my job. My job isn't to control everything. My job is to make it so that people feel okay when they come and talk to me. And one step later, they feel that they've been heard and that they matter, and that they've been seen, and more we'll find out together. I create a plan, I put it out in the universe. Sometimes they take it, sometimes they become a part of it, sometimes they put it down. Sometimes they say, Hugh, you're wrong. That's not where we're going today. Okay, and here we are. All right. Thank you very much for the time today. You've been amazing.
Hugh, I am grateful for the conversation. I think this is our best show yet.
Yes.
Really fun to have this conversation about logic, psychologic.
Yes.
I appreciate very much Rory Sutherland. Folks, if you're not familiar with Rory Sutherland, go check out his book, Alchemy. Go check him out on YouTube. He's all over, and he is just a pleasure to listen to. He's got a wonderful voice, a tremendous British accent, and just a whole lot of really kind of amazing insight. I hope this has been a great conversation for you, Hugh, and for you at home listening or watching. Join us next time for Leadership Uncertain, adventures in power, confusion, love, and
dignity.
On our best days, dignity.
Yes. All right.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate you.